Welcome everybody to the first episode of The Corner Table, a world building podcast by world builders for world builders. My name is Xavier, and I'm joined by my two other hosts. We got Kevan.
Hello.
And Breilen.
Hey.
So this is a podcast, like we said, by world builders. We're by world builders for world builders. We're going to be talking about world building in general. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what this podcast is and like what is world building, and also cover some of our experiences and some of the things that you run into all the time doing world building yourself, and just stuff that's interesting, you know?
Sure.
So in general, when we're talking about this, the question comes up of what even is world building? What are we talking about? What is this show? What is life?
Baby, don't hurt me.
Somebody had to build this world, you know. We don't want to get too far, but you know,
This is now a theology podcast.
There we go. But in general, what is world building? So, does anyone want to take a good swing at the definition of world building for someone else to then tear down afterwards? If not, then I can do the torn down one.
Sure. So I'm gonna work with this, going off the cuff here.
Yes.
World building is, I'm going to say, the art of portraying a reality, whether real or generally fictional.
Okay. It has to be fictional.
So I guess reality would not be the right word there, but I would need to tweak that, because fictional reality is by definition not reality.
Do you have to do if you're writing a memoir, do you have to do world building? Or is it just like
Yes, because you are portraying a universe, if you will.
Okay.
I think world building is it's very much like verbal painting. It's giving a picture to your audience, whether that be the readers, whether that be people at your D&D game, or people coming to watch your film. It is the canvas on which everything happens.
Yeah. Yeah, when we talk about setting and letting people actually understand where they are, where's the story taking place, that's when we get to world building. Because even in that sense, you would say a history book kind of has to do some world building.
Yeah.
Yes.
Talking about, okay, this was the state during World War I, because otherwise it's kind of hard to tell what's going on.
Or if you are describing a culture that's different to the culture that the reader is familiar with, that's also world building in a way.
Right.
But we're not talking about any of those ones. We don't care about, none of us are out here trying to write a memoir, as far as I know.
Nope, not yet.
Or a history book, as far as I know.
Nope.
So we're mostly talking about writing and RPGs, and, fiction, you know, places where there are world building.
Yep.
So the big question there, when we're talking about what is world building, is the question of where does world building stop and storytelling begin? Because we're not just going to be talking about the in-depth parts of every story that's ever been told. We're talking about building a world.
Yeah.
So in what ways do these things is this a versus? Is it world building versus storytelling?
I think you can't have one without the other. I think they are linked. You can't separate the two. World building without storytelling is just a physics simulator. The way that I would kind of describe it is even our world, which we would define as reality, is the way that we live our lives is based on stories. We all kind of live our lives based off of stories, and I think the same thing goes with world building. Is world building without storytelling, it doesn't really exist.
Okay. Yeah. So in that way, you would say that every single story needs world building.
Yeah.
It might be in the forefront in some cases.
Right.
It might be the minor backdrop that we have when we're reading something or watching a movie. They don't have a lot of time to explain everything that's going on in every single movie or TV show or anything. But you need some level of world building for any story that needs to be told.
Yep.
So I would say that world building would be, that is the part of the story that exists outside of the tale being told.
Sure.
Okay. Well, okay,
because all stories exist within a context.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And in some, that context is very implicit or assumed to be understood by the reader. And in others, it's, well, this exists in a context that you are not very familiar with. So I'm going to spend time explaining things about this world to you and allowing you to conceive of it as an independent entity, so to speak, in which this story that I'm telling you is taking place.
Is okay for a clear example, I can't remember in Star Wars Episode 4, like the first one, does it begin with the title crawl, or is that only in Episode 5?
No, it begins with a title crawl.
I thought it does. Yeah, because like they felt the need to open up the story.
But here's the context of what's going on.
Yeah, rather than just you dropped in some random place with lasers. It's like, no, we have to. Okay, here's some setting detail. Not everything does that. Not every story needs to do that. But I think that makes sense in terms of the. Oh, there's one other point that you said though that I thought was interesting. You said it's the world building is what the part. Say that again. Was it the part that takes place outside the story?
So the way that I believe I originally phrased it was something along those of it's the part of the story that takes place outside of the tale being told.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which puts a separation between story and tale.
Okay, but that's which I think is interesting. But does that mean, in your mind, just the way you're defining this, as soon as we surface something in the story, it's no longer world building? That there's a separation between what is told versus what simply exists in the context and informs the story being told.
So, no, because everything that is being told is a part of the larger story.
Okay.
Right. The tale. Yes.
So it's more to Breilen's point of the world building is the canvas on which a story is told.
Yeah, and you could have. You can take even the example that you used of Star Wars of like we have this massive galaxy that we have stories that are some of them are interlinked and then some of them are just like there's this thing that's happening over here doesn't really involve anybody else, or maybe it involves a couple minor characters who pop in for a cameo because that sells. But it doesn't really have a bearing on the overarching story of kind of the Skywalker saga. That's like the primary thing that we have. It's you can just have like, okay, this is in the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. There you go. That's all it is.
Right. And it's good.
So for me, something like the Ewoks are living on this moon is I consider that to be part of the story.
Sure.
Even if it is not really part of the tale. Right? It's not part of the Skywalker saga in as much as, yes, he interacts with them for this little bit here, but the idea is that there's this society that exists beyond this bit that just Luke interacts with. And that I would also consider to be part of the story in a way. Does that make sense? Is that a fair definition? Or do you put that as, well, no, this is its own category and the Skywalker saga is the story?
Well, I think you can have multiple stories that are interlinked or running parallel or running, in any number of different directions that intersect or don't. In that aspect, it's like, okay, we've got Wicket the Ewok. He's got his own story that we don't know. Mm-hmm. That's not the story that we are being told. Yes. But that story could be told. He has a story. He has world building. He has all of these things around him. It's just, it has not been put to film or, to the best of my knowledge, to writing. Maybe there's fan fiction out there about
someone wrote a novel at some point that involved Wicket. There's too many.
Yeah.
But I think that brings up an interesting point between what is and isn't part of the story, because especially at least in my experience, doing world building, a lot of it is more, one of the primary focuses for me is building the illusion of depth, because you don't actually have time to write Wicket's story. I barely have enough time to write Luke's story.
Right.
We got things to do.
Yeah.
So instead, it's like, okay, I need you to be curious enough about the things that are taking place off screen that it's interesting to you.
Yeah.
But it's might be an inch deep in places.
Sure.
In some places, it has to be a lot deeper, because otherwise the story starts to lose a lot of coherency.
Yeah.
But in most places, it is, how do we pretend that this is really, that there's a lot going on in this canvas when really I've painted this and where the shadow and where the light will cover, and everything else is actually just blank.
Yep. Yeah. It's kind of, I think we might get into this later when we get a little bit more into depth into like various different kinds of world building, but like for NPCs in like a tabletop RPG, it's very much like what's their job in terms of pushing the narrative forward. What do I need this character to do? And then maybe I give them an accent, maybe I give them a little bit of a quirk, maybe they have a profession.
Yeah.
And that's about it. That's the depth of world building that goes into this. Now, occasionally you get into trouble where your PCs are like, "Oh, we love this guy. We want to know everything about him." And you're like, "Well, that's all I prepared."
That's something I definitely want to cover. We'll cover it some here, but we could do a whole episode on that because there's a lot of that of like, okay, and setting up a lot of potential NPCs. Like, okay, there's like 7 characters who I wrote one line about.
Yep.
But it's enough that we can play the game. And then if you like this, then I can go and actually build them deeper into the world. Like you make sure they have room to grow if they need to, but you don't spend a lot of time.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of how we look in both film and writing at kind of these, not even kind of tertiary characters where they are named. They're not just Stormtrooper number 50, who's shooting and missing and whatever. They are a character that has a name, maybe has a little bit of dialogue, but in some way interacts with the main plot.
Yes.
And I think those are kind of, they are where you get some of the world building of you get these little snippets into there's life outside of your main cast, and this is kind of how it is functioning.
You don't get too locked into the moment.
Right.
The whole story is the plot line that the protagonist is following, and there's nothing else going on in the world. These characters have lives. The world is turning.
Right.
It's not just. It doesn't it exists outside of the characters themselves.
Yeah, basically it allows like the reader or the viewer to pretend that there's still a story going on when the lights are turned off.
Yes.
Right.
Rather than, I'm trying to think of a good example of where it's done poorly. Maybe you guys have one, but sometimes, it's like, okay, this only kind of works because we're watching it, but the moment that we were to leave, this society ceases to exist. Oh, the camera went away. Now the characters don't move apparently, or they move super slow. It just doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I can come up with an example off the top of my head, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. No, but that's a good point. Go ahead.
I guess so. This is maybe sort of a cheap example, but Counter-Strike. There is no world to the game outside of I have a guy with a gun. I'm going to shoot the other guy, and either I'm going to plant or defuse an explosive. That's like, but why are we here? Why are we doing this? None of it matters.
Counter-Strike for you, Breilen, the viewers who don't know, it's a shooter.
Okay.
It is.
I gathered that much.
The story is that it is terrorists versus counter-terrorists. The terrorists are placing a bomb. The counter-terrorists are trying to prevent that or defuse the bomb.
Gotcha.
But there is no coherency in this world of like, okay, but why are we now in France?
Sure.
What is this bomb?
Why do we only have 2 minutes to plant it?
Right. Okay.
Like, why can't we plant it 2 minutes and 1 second?
Yeah.
It's just not. There's no.
Right.
Now, of course, it's a game, but like even some of these, even some multiplayer games do a better job of actually establishing a world that exists outside of the moment
you're playing the game.
Yes.
Like I think Titanfall tried something like that. I didn't play much of it.
Titanfall was a lot more.
No,
there's gonna be a lot of that when we get into video games.
It's just Titanfall's a shooter where they tried to build a story into every single multiplayer match. It's very common in single player video games.
Yeah.
Like if you look at a video game like I don't know, Zelda.
Yeah.
You kind of need to world build a fair amount because it's an RPG.
Right.
And there's character interactions and there's things going on. We might need to know who the Gorons are, kind of.
Right. Yeah. You want to have that kind of experience because that's why you are there. Whereas in a shooter, like again, not my area of expertise by any means, but that's not the purpose of why I'm here. I think maybe even a better example is like the Mario Party games or Mario Kart or something where it's just like for all of the games, Mario and Bowser are like, no, we're like, my job is to
mortal
defeat
enemies.
you, but also now we're just gonna hang out and drive cars.
Yeah, you know
Or
what?
maybe we'll play
well,
tennis together.
You know, when Bowser and Mario are sharing a cart, that they
Right.
they want to win the race. It's fine.
Yeah. So
You know,
yeah, I think something like that where it's just like that's not the purpose is just the mechanics of the game. It's not. There's no world building to it.
versus in a game, in an RPG, a game like Zelda, a game
Yeah.
like even more so on something like Skyrim. It's
Sure.
they're trying to make you be immersed in the world,
Yeah.
put you in the world, and different media. You kind of have to do further distances. That's a huge thing in tabletop RPGs where
Yep.
it's like if you're GMing, you are really trying to make your players be immersed in the world
Yeah.
and in their character. So the world building has to be in service to that. But yeah.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts then in terms of world building in service to storytelling versus world building for its own sake? Because one thing that I've heard brought up, I don't know if you guys have heard of this before, is world builders disease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So world builders disease, if you're not familiar, is the tendency for some people to get so into the world building that they never actually tell the story, they never actually complete the work. They just keep building on the world.
Yep.
To the expense of the actual story that they were looking to tell in the first place.
Right. I think something that I have discovered both with my writing and with designing TTRPGs is if you're doing good world building, you've already started storytelling. Yes. So just keep going. It's just like if you're doing a good job, like there has to be in the world building, you can't just go like, there's a king. And that's the end. Like, there's a king in a city named this, and I made a map, and that's all I've got. Like,
I'd still play that.
That's not helpful.
We're in the city. There's a king.
Right.
It depends on what we're doing.
I think in order to get that immersion, you've got to go. Okay, well, here's the king. Here's the way that the city runs. This is the function of the city. This is the theater district. This is the tavern district. This is the mining district. This is this, that, and the other thing. We start to build all of these things together. And then if you want, then you start, if you're really getting into your world building, then you start to get cohesion of like, okay, well, why is this next to this? Like, well, this is this, that, and the other thing. Okay, cool. We've got this. The city is next to an enchanted forest. Cool, that's a cool idea. People like enchanted forests. Why is the forest enchanted? And then you have to tell a story as to why is it enchanted. And so I think in terms of like, because this is something that I definitely struggled with of just like, I loved the idea of starting stories and I would write out a cool idea and be like, this is great. No idea where it's going. Or doing the same thing for TTRPGs of just like, oh, this is such a cool idea, cool concept. And I'll put all these things together and go, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And then what I discovered is like in my world building, I created all of this like backstory stuff so that I could tell the story that I didn't know what it was. So just tell the backstory.
You ended up building.
I wrote a whole story to tell the story that I didn't know how to tell.
And it's like the backstory that you build naturally tells you at least what you are interested in.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, then work off of that.
Yeah.
I know you've done more GMing of RPGs than either of us.
Yeah.
Does that track with you in terms of like world building to tell the story versus world building off by itself, or not so much your experience?
So that's a good question. So the problem is I've done a fair amount of GMing. I haven't done as much successful GMing as I would like, especially in recent years. So make of that what you will. For me, I find that doing good world building gives you a sandbox that, for tabletop RPG specifically, it gives you a sandbox that you can then springboard off of.
Yes.
Don't springboard off of sand; that doesn't work. But it gives you like a structure that then you can tell the story that you want to at the table.
Exactly.
And then you can also have all these other cool stories on the back end. And there's nothing wrong with that.
It also leaves a lot of doors open to the players of like, as you build the nice sandbox, they can pick and choose things they want to play with. And you've already done some background work, so you know where it might be going.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're not left scrambling to try and figure something out when you have all of these different stories that you can pull from.
Yes.
And you can just go, okay, well, I thought the campaign was going this way and it's not, but that's okay. we're going over to this area, and I've got all of this stuff around that.
Right. Good world building allows you to answer the question when the players ask, so what is this NPC's profession?
Yeah.
Because he is the last janitor on this derelict spaceship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And versus, and it gives you, you actually have a way to go after that. Because sometimes, on the spot, you could throw out something. Yeah, he's the last janitor. And then they want to talk to him, and then you're like, oh no.
It's like, well, it's because he's cleaning up this part of the ship that you guys need to go deal with.
Right.
Yes. So leave him alone.
Yeah.
No, that's true. In general, that's my experience too. I haven't done as much GMing, but especially GMing a longer campaign in an existing setting.
Yeah.
It's very important to go and get your personal world building out of the way as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, in my experience, it was a lot harder to craft storylines because it's like you don't have enough. There's not enough scaffolding there to build things. It's hard to build anything longer term if you don't have a bunch of world building scaffolding up about what not just individual characters are doing or what individual character motivations are, but in general,
what's going on in the world that they're playing in.
Exactly. What is the direction of the world? What sort of things will go on if the players do not do anything?
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of, I was going to bring that up of going back to like, what happens when the camera turns off of like, if your characters were not here, what would happen? Yes. And that's what like I have to create of like, this is all of this stuff that's happening. And then you're coming in and you're messing with that, or you're going along with it, or however. But then I have to work that around. I have probably the least amount of DMing experience out of the three of us, but the experience that I do have is all entirely unique. Like I've never run a module or anything like that. It's always been like, I created this world, I had this story in mind, and we're going to run it. Usually it's all been like very short, kind of one shot or 2 to 3 sessions. Right now I'm gearing up for my first kind of long-term campaign, and that's been a lot of what I've been working on is going, okay, who are my main players in the world and what are they doing? What's their motivations? What's their goals? Okay, cool. I want to have this kind of villain in here. That's going to be our main villain. What's he doing? What's his goal or hers, whatever. And then, okay, cool. And now I've got these characters and they're giving me these kinds of ideas and these backstories, and I have to weave all of that together. So it is very different, I've found, than just writing a novel, because it is cooperative to an extent. In terms of I'm not the only one world building or storytelling, and I kind of have to ping pong it off of my players, which I enjoy. And it cuts down a lot on the anxiety that I feel of just like, is this good? Was this a good story? I don't know.
I was like, okay, guys, pause. Are you having fun right now? Do you enjoy the story? Is this interesting? Can you tell me? Did you just no? Yeah.
It's just, I think having that background, both in the TTRPG space and in the novel space, is incredibly helpful.
I agree. I remember having some good experiences specifically in some games that you've GM'd, Kevin, of like you setting up. The one thing that I liked a lot was you would set up a lot of things in the world building, but kind of invite the players to build more on them and to establish more of the lore. I really enjoyed that. It's like in a very limited sense, because especially as a player, you don't got to worry about making everything work. You just this sounds.
I just can say something that sounds cool, and then you got to figure it out.
I'll pitch it to you, and if you don't say no, that's how it is.
That's how it is.
But I know that puts a lot of pressure on you to make sure that people's individual things are coherent still.
Yeah.
But it did turn into a good experience at the end.
Right. That's one of those things that's easier to do if you can get the players in on it early.
Yep.
So that way you have time to actually reconcile those differences, and somebody doesn't come at you halfway through the campaign saying, what if my character actually had a sister who was a demigoddess?
It's like, that would have been helpful to know 25 hours ago.
Time out. There's kind of a corollary issue here. Is this your full sister? Then we might have a problem. The math is not mathing out.
Do you even genetics, bro?
That's not how this works. Yeah.
Or you just world build the problem away and go, well, sisters don't work the same way. The word sister just means like female kinsman.
You would
Then you're
complicate
fine.
things so much more. Trying to do that. That is another thing of like, it's the tendency that I'll have less so in TTRPGs. This is more in like story writing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you have something in mind that you want to do. It seems like it would be cool if this thing. Cool. The easiest solution is usually a really bad one, and you end up crowbarring it in, and the world no longer makes coherent sense. Yeah. You're like, okay, I want to set the sci-fi story on a desert planet, so it's all a desert. Cool.
And that's all I'm going to give you.
And it didn't. It's like, okay, but if this is a major setting, we have problems like how do people eat? Or live?
Yeah.
Is there like water? You said there was animals. How?
Right.
Why? Also, why are people here on the desert planet? Did they grow up here? Did they fly here? Because it doesn't make sense that they would come here as the desert.
Yeah.
Like the easy solution.
Are they out here to harvest moisture or to harvest spice? Or
That's actually a good example because I think those are two things that go. One goes very, very soft world building.
Yes.
With Star Wars is just like it's a desert planet. There are people there.
Yeah.
How doesn't matter. They are. Don't worry about it. Whereas Arrakis is very much like there's a whole science as to why is it a desert planet? Why are these people here? How does all of this work?
It's very clearly established in Dune why they are going in the first place.
Right.
Why does the story need to take place here? Isn't this a terrible place to live?
Right.
Yes.
And even beyond that, of just like, how do you have a whole planet that is just one biome?
Yes. How does that work? Why?
Yeah.
No.
It's like, well, you've got these massive creatures that just turn everything into sand.
oh.
also,
Okay.
in
Spoilers
fairness,
for
a lot of planets are sort of one biome.
They're just
Not
like
ours.
they're off,
Not ours, no.
But there are also a lot of planets that are off camera,
Right,
So
yes.
to say,
And most of those planets are usually uninhabitable by humans.
it's like no one's talking about the vast diversity of Mars.
Right.
As far as we can tell, there's not really anything living there.
Right.
Though.
Venus is one biome. Death.
But no, it is a good point. And like in Star Wars, it's fine because at
That's
least
not what you're there for.
And at least in the first movie, they're on the desert planet for like what, half an hour,
Maybe.
and then they
Something
leave,
like that.
and they never come back. And
There's plenty of cool stuff going on that you don't really care. You don't want necessarily the answers for it. You're just like, oh, we got to go find this old man in the desert. Oh, there's the old mysterious man. That's super fun.
And there's a bunch of random, interesting mystery just going on around. You got like the sand crawlers,
Right.
and the Jawas for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah. And you just kind of accept it. Of just like, this is the world that I'm in. I'm not given answers. It's just, there's an alien because it is. All right. I'm cool with that.
What are they doing? Oh, they're buying and selling droids.
Makes sense?
Makes sense.
Okay,
I'm tracking. I'm good.
That's something an alien might do.
Yeah,
And
I
see
think
that.
I think different stories call for different levels per se of world building. Like, I mean, one of the things that I really, really do enjoy about Dune is the amount of world building in it because it's very sciencey. It's very much a book written by an ecologist, which is right up my alley. And I really, really like that. I wouldn't like that in my Star Wars. That's not what I want out of my Star Wars. What I want out of my Star Wars is lightsaber knight and guy with blaster. That's all I need.
Those guys.
I want lightsaber knight and differently colored lightsaber knight.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's red because he's a bad guy.
Right.
Yes.
This guy's got a lightsaber that comes out of both ends. Why? I don't care. It's super cool.
This guy's lightsaber has a cross guard. Why? I don't know.
It
Super
looked
cool.
kind of baller though. I don't know what to tell you. But no, it's like, this is a generic good versus evil, and we're talking about the Force and
Yeah. It's very, very light, and that's all that I really want. It's a light-hearted space opera, and I don't need all of the science for it. I don't want all of the science for it.
But Dune has to do a ton of world building, for the science bit, but also just history of the setting. So
Right.
we could be talking about Lisan al Gaib
Right.
versus
It's like-
Muad'Dib,
Right.
and the ways that all these things come back. But that it comes directly connected into the story. It's just that the canvas had to be a little wider than Star Wars, which at least the original trilogy did not need to cover very much. It was just most of the Jedi were dead. It's just there were guys named Jedi, laser sword.
Yep. That's all I want. That's all I need. I'm happy with it.
Rebels versus Empire.
Yeah, it's a very simple narrative, which is not bad.
Yes. It just depends on the kind of story you need to tell.
Yeah, and I think that kind of coming all the way back to good world building versus good storytelling. I think good world building is world building that fits the story you want to tell, and good storytelling is storytelling that fits the world you built. Like if you want this deep political thriller and your world building is Star Wars level, where it's like we don't have all of these different, like we have two factions. All right, not a whole lot of political thriller that can go along with that, because it's just like, well, it's these guys versus these guys. That's it. The only twist is this guy was actually one of those guys.
There was a spy.
Yeah, like so I think that's kind of what it comes down to between those two, of like what is good world building and what is good storytelling, are both of those complementing each other and fitting what the world building fitting the story you want to tell, and the story fitting the world that you built. I think that's kind of it.
I think a contrast there that came to my mind was a couple of games in the Legend of Zelda series.
Okay.
So Wind Waker is one of my favorite Zelda games.
Sure.
And in that game, it takes place like on an open sea, and there's basically like 49 just like islands just out in the middle of nowhere. And there's really nothing outside of that. Like you can't go exploring the rest of the ocean. So it's never really answered, is this like the entirety of the world that's left, or are there islands out there that I just don't get to go to?
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but also like, why is the world just a bunch of islands? Like that's explained much later in the game, but it's like, I never really cared. I was having fun running around being Link and killing things.
Right. And that's kind of what I mean, is like that fits the story that was being, like the story of Wind Waker is a coming of age story. Like it is very much a just like boy in small island village that then goes and is experiencing the greater world. And how does he react? How does he experience this? How does he conquer his demons? So I think I would say that fits in perfectly well, of like the story isn't this grand overarching narrative that has to do with like this great continent that is in danger. We get a little bit of that like trickling in at the end, kind of, but that's not really what the focus of the story is. Like the original thrust of the story is, I need to save my sister.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if there are other islands out there. It doesn't matter like the whole history of Hyrule getting flooded and all of this different stuff. It's just, what I care about is my character lost his sister. I need to go get her back.
I've never thought about like, what would it be like to live in the Wind Waker world? Like I don't really have an interest in that. But as a contrast, Majora's Mask, which is one of my top 3 favorite video games from anywhere. That game, I feel, really does need good world building to succeed.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And that's a game that I've thought a lot about, of like, what if I were in this situation, in this world, and you know, there was no Link here.
Yeah.
It was me, and I had to look at this moon that was getting closer and closer by the day. And you have all of these NPCs around. It's like, it feels like, okay, this is actually taking place in a world.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think again, like that is world building that fits the story that you're telling. Like if you had the world building of Wind Waker with the apocalypse narrative of Majora's Mask, it would be like,
who cares?
It's a huge disconnect.
Yes.
Wind Waker, even the visual design of Wind Waker is meant to tell you whimsy, good time, adventure, all of it, and Link's character. Whereas Majora's Mask is a lot darker. It's a lot more introspective in its design.
And you have to have these more deep, in-depth NPCs.
Yes.
Because if you don't, then you don't really care.
Right.
About saving them.
Yes.
Like that's not. It's like, all right, whatever. The moon's gonna come down and then we'll all be dead. But none of these people seem that
this is a video
interesting
game.
or worth saving.
Yeah.
So I think that I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it's a good contrast to pull.
Yeah.
between,
Right, because
yeah.
comparing something like Dune and Star Wars sometimes
Sure.
feels a little bit unfair because it's these are setting out to like they're two very different they're different genres of movie
Yeah.
Yes.
or
Yeah.
book or
They're setting out to accomplish different
Different
things. And I guess what I would argue is that Wind Waker and Majora's Mask are also setting out to accomplish separate
they
things.
are yes.
Yeah, but that's they happen to both be
They
called
happen
The Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, they happen to share a brand. But aside from that, I think comparing them the same way that we would compare Star Wars and Dune, I think it's a fairly fair thing to do, just in terms of like they were not trying to accomplish the same thing, so the world building and the narrative both had to be different.
Exactly. So yeah, so these are all really good examples. For us personally, we're not going to be making a Zelda.
Nope.
That's not going to happen. But there is a lot of things that are going to come up that we'll be talking about based on what we are individually working on. I'm working on a longer novel manuscript than I've ever done before. So it needs a lot of world building, and I've been running into a lot of issues of things that we don't got time to talk about specifically today. Like, how do I make the planets and make that make sense?
Yep.
Why does it matter?
Yep.
And then in general, again, back to when we're talking about where storytelling and world building intersect, it's like, okay, how much of the characters and the backstory do we even go into here without just wasting time? Because some of it is.
Yeah.
Some of it can just be wasteful and not helpful at all. But yeah. And then obviously you said you're working on a tabletop RPG campaign. So that's going to be a big thing that we have to work through.
Yep.
The different pieces that work out there.
Definitely.
Yes. And then Kevin, I know you're working on some writing stuff. I'm sure at some point, a little bit. I'm sure at some point you'll be doing another RPG because that's just how it goes.
So I still have this setting that I started a long time ago that you played one half campaign in, so to speak, that I would like to revisit at some point and actually spend more time working on.
Sure.
But that's one of those, it's almost set up just for the point of getting world builder's disease of having the enjoyment of working on this world or this campaign setting. But for my writing, I'm actually working on a story that's taking place in an existing franchise.
Okay.
And so since it's fan fiction, that leads you to the interesting world building challenge of, okay, how do I build upon a world that's already been
within
built?
laws? Yeah.
We'll definitely have to talk about that because I've written some fan fiction as well, and it's interesting. Like it definitely eases a lot of things. In a lot of ways, it's so much easier because you don't have to ask a lot of the questions of like, okay, but how does this society work? That's already been solved. If someone liked the original one and they were going to look at yours, that's good. But then, knowing how much you can build on top and what's bad and good and like where's the good. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions there to be had as well.
Yeah, that's nothing that I have had experience with as of yet, but it's definitely an interesting question that warrants discussion.
And you've at least played in, I did a Avatar The Last Airbender RPG campaign.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and even as a player, there was stuff where it's like, well, I can't really make that decision because then we're in a different world.
Exactly. I don't want to disrupt what's going on.
Yeah.
So
especially because in that campaign, like we were running side by side with the show. Like events of the show were happening while we were playing the game. So it wasn't even just like I can't just go over here and start doing a different kind of bending because I'm not the avatar. It was like, I can't make this decision to go to this city because this is what's happening there and I can't get involved in that.
Yes, I will ruin the events of the story and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, so that it was definitely interesting as a PC of just kind of like, because I'm used to as a PC just kind of going like, I can just pretty much do whatever I want, and the DM kind of has to figure it out along the way.
And I was ready for that. I would have figured out. I would have figured out if someone did something crazy and got the avatar killed. But the world would have blown up. So what are we gonna say?
So I was gonna say like, so I was thinking, wow, that must be a nightmare to DM and do like, oh, how do I plan this session based on what happened in the last episode? And then based on what you just said, I realized that's really not any different than the player deciding to do it. And
exactly.
You have to react to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, it was hard. It was a very interesting challenge in general to like construct campaign arcs around arcs of the show.
Right.
And especially to like, if the players there was one arc, for example, where they were in the North Pole during the events when the Avatar characters were in the North Pole.
Yeah.
So how do these characters not just run into each other?
Right.
That's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
But in general, it's it's not any different than any other thing when you're
Right.
building on someone else's work of like, they give you a lot to work with and you have a very strict timeline to work with,
Yeah.
which is nice, but also then you are constrained by the timeline.
Yep.
You can do that in your own world building, but you're not forced to this
Right.
way. So
Yeah.
all right.
A lot more
Well,
wiggle room.
I think we are at a good time to
Sure.
end this episode.
Sure.
But it's been a good time. I hope you guys have enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
This is only episode 1. Next
Yeah.
episode will not be an intro episode. It'll be a real one.
Yes.
We'll talk about something super important like the construction of grass in your world.
Very important.
As
There are
a,
many different types.
I have gone to turf grass school, so I can
we have a resident grass knower, so
I
we
can
have
tell
that
you all
covered.
about how grass works.
But yeah, I think that is good for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you when the next one comes out. I'm not gonna put
We don't have a date on that.
but before the end of 24. That's
there
our
you go.
Possibly. No
Possibly.
promises.
Lord willing. All right. But yeah, see you guys.